Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Spandex, Spells, and Shadows? By Melinda Chase. Narrated by Traci Odom. Chapter 1. 1 month with no insanity. Well, unless I counted the fact that I'd nearly blown up the garden shed on two occasions. Accidentally turned Herman into a toad, then a snake, and then a rat before he finally shifted back to a cat. And also set fire to my mom's favorite dirty romance novel series. They weren't really all that great anyways. Or maybe I was just feeling a little bit lonely. I'd finally gotten up the guts to semi-express to Hunter how I felt about him, and now he was locked up in a Portland hotel room 4.5 miles away, and I was under strict orders not to visit him, no matter how dire the circumstances became. I wasn't too keen on violating these orders, seeing as Hunter was still bound to the council, and therefore had an insatiable thirst for my blood, not unlike the kind Edward Cullen had for Bella in the Twilight series. Only the two of us were full-grown adults, and knew how to spot toxic relationship dynamics from 1,000 miles away. So, since I'd been busy staying far away from Hunter at all times, keeping busy with our family magic emporium, and attempting to figure out how to rein in my now out-of-control half-fae magic, the month that had passed since we'd gotten our family grimoire back had done so in relative calm. Come to think of it, my definition of relative calm had changed a lot in the last few months. It used to be that Shannon McCarthy thought a calm month was when no one turned up dead in a park somewhere. Now, calm months happened when only 3 major disasters occurred, and I didn't end up having to save everyone I love from certain doom. Oh, how the times had changed. "Do you plan on sitting there all day, or would you like to make yourself useful?" my mother demanded as she tromped down the staircase, already dressed and ready. I glanced at the clock on the mantel, the one that shot out a tiny stuffed pixie every hour, on the hour, and pointed at the large hand, which was just barely past 5 a.m. "It's morning meditation time," I murmured to her gently. I'd been attempting to get my stubborn, hot-headed mother to meditate with me for the last week and a half. I'd read a statistic in Women's Health that claimed daily meditators managed to increase their lifespan by an average of 4 to 7 years. Now, I had no idea how true that was. But what did 10 minutes of quiet thought a day hurt? According to Mom, those 10 minutes made her want to rip her hair out of her head. "You're still on that," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "Fine. But we need to get this spell over with before it's time to open the shop. Keep doing your woo-woo shit, and I'm going to make myself a pot of coffee and meditate on how to find this curse-breaking spell." Mom whirled out of the living room and into the kitchen, where she proceeded to bang around and make more noise than a fireworks display on the 4th of July. "Tune it out, Shannon," I murmured to myself, closing my eyes and working to quiet my mind. That was the part I was still having some trouble with. Or a lot of trouble with, if I'm being honest. My mind didn't really do quiet. The second I closed my eyes, Hunter's face popped into my head. His sweet, charismatic, protective face. He was staring at me like I was the devil incarnate, and he was ready to drive a stake through my heart. His gray eyes were alight with anger. More anger than I'd ever seen in my life. "Shit!" I gasped. My eyes flew open of their own accord, and I was staring at my living room again, with a few logs in the fireplace and a million different charms hanging haphazardly around the mantel. "Not so calm now, huh?" Mom chuckled, returning to the living room with 2 steaming mugs of coffee in her hands. "Everyone's meditation journey is different," I parroted, recalling the article I'd read. "Some people take a little longer to adjust to this new way of being." Mom narrowed her eyes, staring at me with pursed lips and an expression of absolute disbelief. "Some people aren't half-fae witches, and they definitely aren't the only one of their kind in existence," she pointed out. My stomach twisted up into a tight knot at her words, so I distracted myself by taking a sip of the burning hot coffee, and purposefully ignoring the way it seared my tongue as it slipped down my throat. I had yet to tell Mom about the discovery I'd made in Rodolfo's diary. The hunter had claimed that I was, in fact, not the only half-fae in existence. A few hundred years ago, he'd known of at least 3. If I was correct in my estimate of our lifespan, it was highly probable those 3 were still alive. But even if they weren't, let's just say it didn't seem too crazy to hypothesize that Grams wasn't the only witch in recent history to fall in love with a fae and have a child. By now, I had learned that one of the central tenets of the earthly magical world was false. We'd all been brought up to believe that fae were a rarity in our realm. They only crossed over to cause mischief and do evil. Any that did come over were promptly sought out and killed by the Hunters' Council. Clearly that wasn't true, which left me to wonder how many fae were living among us undetected. "What you thinking about?" Mom asked, adding a little bit of a lilt to her voice. "Nothing." It was a weak cover. Actually, it was more like a non-existent cover. But I really wasn't in the mood to divulge my inner musings just yet. First of all, I knew Mom would feel like I'd lied to her, which was the exact opposite of the truth. And second of all, I just wasn't ready. I couldn't really put my finger on why, but it just felt strange to talk about it with Mom and Grams, knowing they could never truly understand. Mom's fae side had been bound when she was so young, before her powers had really set in, that it was almost like they hadn't even existed in the first place. Neither of them could really understand the way I was feeling. "Let's just do this spell," I announced, standing up and sucking down the entire cup of coffee. "Is Grams awake yet?" "Barely," my grandma croaked as she descended the wooden staircase. She was still rubbing the sleep out of her eyes, and her gray, curly hair was mussed up. She wasn't the normal, put-together Grams everyone else would be used to seeing, but then again, Grams of the morning was an entirely different person than Grams at any other time. "I may have woken her up 10 minutes before her alarm," Mom confessed. "Yes, El, the alarm that I had set to give myself plenty of time to sleep in before we needed to perform the spell for Shannon," Grams snapped, shuffling into the kitchen and getting her coffee. Even at 90 years old, Grams drank at least 4 cups of coffee a day. I used to insist that she slow down on the caffeine intake, but that had never gotten me anywhere. Grams did her own thing. She always had and always would. Besides, ever since I'd discovered I came from a family of witches, I couldn't help but wonder if Grams had some sort of secret gene that helped her stay youthful. Most other 90-year-olds lived in nursing homes and rode around in wheelchairs, but Grams still acted like she was 65. "Well, Mama, sometimes your alarm clock isn't all that reliable," Mom pointed out. Grams harumphed, but said nothing more. Instead, the old matriarch led us out of the house and to the garden shed in the backyard, where all of the magical ingredients we needed for virtually any spell were kept, along with a few other magical items that were a bit more deadly than some dried rose petals and a stick of selenite. In the center of the shed sat a massive black cauldron over a tiny green flame. The slimy green potion inside was bubbling away, popping like hot grease every once in a while. Next to the cauldron sat a tall, eccentric witch with her finger pointed out straight to control the massive stick she'd placed in the cauldron. It spun around and around, stirring the potion easily. "Morning, Marcella," Mom said. "Shh," Marcella hissed. "He's just about to... Oh, my!" It was then that the 3 of us caught sight of the slightly burned book Marcella held in her lap. Her eyes were wide as she read the page, and I could have sworn I saw her actually lick her lips before she looked up abruptly. "Do people actually do this sort of thing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she held up the book for us to see. The cover had a photo of a swooning woman, dressed in something from the 18th century, although the outfit was far more busty than anything I expected had been proper. A shirtless, oiled-up man held her in his arms, as if she needed to be saved by his macho Photoshop muscles. The title read, "Between the Woven Sheets." I couldn't help the disgusted sound that came out of my mouth. "Whatever it is, no," I told her. "Only if you find the right guy," Mom chuckled at the exact same moment. And then both of us went beet red. There are some things, no matter how old they are, that mothers and daughters do not wish to discuss. Marcella, though, didn't seem to be at all aware of the awkward silence, because she just nodded, trance-like, and looked back down at the book. "So the potion's ready, right?" I asked, quickly changing the subject to one that was less strange. "Oh, yeah, babe," Marcella nodded. She snapped her fingers, and a cup and ladle appeared out of thin air. She poured a huge spoonful of the slimy green liquid into the cup and then handed it to me. "Drink up." "The spell, Elle," Grams murmured. I stared down at the frothy green liquid I held in my hands, trying to choke back the bile that threatened to rise. It did not look at all appetizing. But alas, if this was the price I had to pay in order to be cloaked from the prying and dangerous eyes of the hunter, I'd pay, though not gladly. Grams and Mom started to chant the spell, each one laying a hand on me, and I sucked in a deep breath before I raised the cup to my lips and started to guzzle down the potion. It tasted like snails. I knew because I'd had them at a restaurant back in Boston once. Then never again. "Et paleo zedige." Marcella joined in on Mom's and Graham's chant, and the sound of all three voices together started to overwhelm me. I wasn't sure if it was the slimy potion, the notion of what we were doing, or the sheer amount of magic that I could feel pulsating through the air, but I suddenly started to feel hot all over. And not in a good way, like when the sun is coming down in the middle of summer and searing all of the skin on my body, but it's still somehow pleasant. This was more like a melting sensation, as if all the cells in my body had been filled with fire and were destroying themselves from the inside out. The heat grew and grew, consuming everything until I was almost certain I was about to black out. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was over. The burning feeling disappeared, leaving behind only traces of heat, and the garden shed came back into my consciousness. It was only then that I realized I had somehow ended up flat on the floor, and the cup had sprung from my hands and landed about a foot away from me. 3 worried faces appeared above me. "I'm good," I croaked. "I'm good." That sentiment was proven a little less true when I rolled over and let out a groan so loud I was sure our neighbors could hear it. My entire body hurt, like I'd just run a half marathon. At least, I assumed that's what a half marathon had to feel like. I'd never actually done one. "Up you go!" Marcella grabbed me by the shoulders and lifted me to my feet with way more strength than I ever thought the woman could have possessed. "So did it work?" Mom asked, scanning me with her alert green eyes like she thought she could actually see the product of our spell. "Don't know," Marcella shrugged. "Guess we'll just have to wait until she gets close enough to a hunter to see." "Great," Mom sighed sarcastically. "Well, I'm sure Hunter could help." "No," 3 voices hollered immediately. "Let's not test our theory needlessly, darling?" Graham said. "Let's go open up the shop instead. Take your mind off of things." I had a feeling I wasn't the one whose mind needed to be distracted. But I relented anyways and drove over to Magic for Real with Grams. The day was busy as always. A small part of me still regretted that we hadn't been able to rehire Annabelle after my semi-disastrous potion had made her forget all about us. But I supposed it was still for the better. I'd rather be busy all day than risk allowing another human into our newly dangerous lives. Around 4, I noticed that the lost and found pile had begun to spill out of the small bin where we kept it and all across the break room floor, so I decided it was time to sort through it. Hardly anyone ever came to retrieve the various coats, purses, and knickknacks that they left behind, so I wanted to discard the trash and take the rest of the stuff down to Goodwill. Maybe someone else would find a use for the ugly green sweater on the top of the pile. I had 3 different piles going when I neared the bottom of the stack and found something that was actually not horrendous for once. A necklace. It was pretty and dainty, with a thin silver chain that almost seemed to glow. Soft pink crystals hung through, and a tiny little pendant in the center. The pendant was a fairy that had been carved straight out of a glittery yellow stone, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The clasp was broken, indicating it had probably fallen off of some poor woman's neck while she was perusing our stage selection, but I had a feeling that finding her would be an impossible task. I was drawn to the necklace, though, for some inexplicable reason. It wasn't at all my style, though I had fairly expensive taste, and I'd never wear something with a pendant like that. Still, I found myself picking it up and traipsing over to the dirty little mirror in the corner of the room to hold it against my chest, trying it on for size. Immediately, a familiar and unwelcome feeling swept over me. "Oh no," I murmured, but it was too late. The break room disappeared around me, and I was swept into an entirely new time and place. Someday I really had to learn to control these visions of mine. A dark, empty field popped up around me, and I felt a shiver of fear reflexively crawl up my spine before I reminded myself that none of it was real. The dark was all-consuming. I couldn't see a single thing except the light of a moon high in the sky. Wait. No. 2 moons. "Where am I?" I murmured aloud, so shocked I couldn't hold it in. I was pretty sure the answer was the world of the Fae. I didn't have time to think it through, though, because a dark, shadowy figure appeared on the horizon. It was running straight toward me with an uneven gait, one that clearly signaled terror. "I want to go home!" the woman screamed. Suddenly, a flash of white light shot out of her hands, lighting up her face so I could clearly see her ivory skin and dark brown hair. The light arced out from her figure and turned into a webbing that I had only seen once before. My magic did the exact same thing. My half-fae magic. "Oh my God!" I screeched, just as the vision dissolved and the break room reappeared around me. "Damn it!" But it was too late. Once the vision was over, it was gone for good. The memory, though, would forever be imprinted in my brain. The memory of another half-fae, just like me. I looked back down at the little fairy necklace in my hand. "I'm gonna find you," I murmured to the necklace. Chapter 2. I managed to make small talk and keep myself semi-sane throughout dinner. It was our weekly family get-together, which meant I was able to distract myself with talk about Auntie Dee Dee's soda shop or some of the newest witchy gossip courtesy of Marcella. It wasn't until I laid down in my bed that night that my mind started to go 100 miles an hour and memories of my vision flooded back to me. I kept replaying it over and over in my head, not that there was very much to go on. I saw the 2 moons hanging high in the sky, then the woman running and screaming, then the burst of bright white magic that emanated from her. It meant everything and nothing all at once. There was one thing I knew for sure. The Fae woman had been in Portland at one time or another. I'd managed to casually ask Grams how long it had been since anyone had cleaned up the lost and found bin, chalking it all up to what a mess the thing was, and she told me it had been about a year, which again was not much to go on. As it had nearly every day for the last 2 months, my mind went to Hunter. I didn't know why, but I had this immovable surety that he'd know what to do. After all, finding people was sort of his gig for a living. And then he'd kill them, but I chose not to think about that for the time being. I wasn't supposed to see him. Actually, his words were, "Don't come to me unless you're going to die. And even then, don't come to me, because I'll probably kill you myself." Terrifying words, but the deeply haunted expression in his gray eyes as he spoke them told me that he truly didn't want them to come true. Hunter wouldn't kill me. He'd resist the orders no matter what. It was 1 a.m. by the time I decided that I needed to see him, under the guise of finding this half-fae woman. Honestly, I really just needed to see him. If it hadn't been for this, I was sure I would have managed to find some other excuse to sneak out of the house in the middle of the night and drive over to the hotel he was staying at. Surprisingly, my new Prius was nearly silent as I pulled out of the driveway. I'd bought it at the used car lot about 3 weeks before, decided that it was too immature for a 40-year-old to keep using her mom's and grandma's cars whenever she needed to go somewhere. "Evening, ma'am," the late-shift valet said as I pulled up to the Kimpton River Place Hotel. Hunter clearly had money somehow because this place was fancy. It was the kind of hotel I used to insist Kenneth and I stay at whenever we went on vacation, back when I was still a DA and cared a lot more about frivolous things like that. "Thanks." I handed the valet my keys, took the ticket, and then nearly skipped inside. I was way more excited than my brain would have cared to admit. It was only once I was in the lobby that I realized I didn't know what room Hunter was in, and this hotel was far too big for me to go door-to-door knocking until I found him. But I was a witch now, so I found a tucked-away corner, closed my eyes, and concentrated. "In Vienna," I murmured. The number 413 popped into my mind, and I knew that's where Hunter was. As the elevator climbed the floors quickly, nervous excitement rose in my chest. My hands started to tremble with barely concealed anxiety, and those stupid butterflies settled in my stomach. I was nervous to see Hunter. I was never nervous for anyone, but Hunter was a whole different ballgame, especially now. Before I knew it, I was in front of room 413 with my hand raised to knock, but I couldn't do it. But then determination filled me. I almost knocked. My knuckles never made contact with the door, though. Once again, I couldn't do it. "Come on, Shannon," I spat to myself. "Get it together. What are you, 5?" I had to shove away the knowledge that I was nervous in a whole different way now. Hunter was under magical, inescapable orders to kill me, and I had just voluntarily come to his hotel room in the middle of the night. It was a stupid move. Even so, I forced myself to knock on his door, rapping 3 times, just loud enough to wake him up. Normally, I would have found it pretty rude to wake someone like that, but when it came to Hunter, half of my normal inhibitions were magically stripped away. Before I knew it, the door swung open with angry veracity, and Hunter was in front of me, fully dressed in a loose black plaid shirt and dark blue denim jeans. His gray eyes were like lightning as they stared directly at me. No, through me. The scruffy brown beard I was used to seeing was gone, shaven off that morning, leaving behind a light 5 o'clock shadow. I liked him better that way. I smiled softly at Hunter, even though his eyes were hard, and prayed he wasn't about to kill me right then and there. "Hello?" he called. His gray eyes flicked away from me and looked off down the hallway in confusion. For a second, my expression matched his confusion before I remembered the spell. "Right, you can't see me," I gasped. Hunter's brow furrowed and his gaze glanced back towards me, but I could see now how it was hollow and empty, staring right through me. "Shannon?" he asked. "Yeah, it's me," I chuckled. "I've got a cloaking spell on. You can't see me." "You've got a... Smart," he laughed as understanding dawned on him. Quickly, though, it was followed by intense anger. "Why are you here? You know I could kill you." One of the doors a few rooms down swung open, and a burly, shirtless man stuck his head out to glare at us angrily. "Not in the hallway," I ordered, suddenly aware of the content of our discussion. Probably not something we needed the lay people to overhear. "Inside." Taking advantage of the fact that he couldn't see me, and therefore couldn't stop me, I pushed past Hunter and into the room. It was gorgeous, but I barely paused to notice the clean white sheets or the marble bathroom. What I was drawn to were the little touches of Hunter that littered the space. A bottle of half-drunk Jack Daniels, a pair of jeans strewn over the desk chair, a map of Portland laid out across the bed next to stacks of papers and a few books. I caught sight of the titles and instantly knew they had come from the magical library. A History of Hunters, one read. The next one was titled Rebellions Against the Council, a Millennia-Long Fight. He was trying to figure out how to get out of his hunter's bond. "Where are you?" Hunter demanded, closing the door and dashing over to sweep the books off the bed, probably hoping I hadn't already seen them. "Right here," I told him, lifting my hand in the air out of habit. "Just in front of the bed." "Okay," he murmured, though his gray eyes still flicked around the room, landing on nothing as they searched for me. "Well, the spell worked, whatever it was." "Good to know," I laughed. The tension was there, though. It laid beneath our words, filling the space like a third party. It wasn't just the tension of the council's orders, though. It was a tension between us, one filled with words unsaid and feelings unfelt, things we should have and would have confessed if he wasn't a hunter and I wasn't a halfling. "You shouldn't be here, Shannon," Hunter finally sighed, rubbing a hand down his face and plopping on the bed. It was then that I realized how tired he looked. Not even just regular old tired, but absolutely exhausted, as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I realized with a start that I was that weight. He was exhausted because it took everything in him not to kill me. "I had to see you," I murmured, chancing it and stepping across the floor towards him. Sorrow sat in my chest, heavy and huge, reminding me of how this would have worked if we were two different people. I could see it all. How if I was still the Boston DA and he was just some private detective, this late-night rendezvous would go so differently. I'd walk across the tiled floor and put a hand to his cheek, but he wouldn't pull away. He'd lean into the touch and tell me he wanted to be with me, and we should try this out. I'd protest, of course, telling him I was newly divorced and I shouldn't start dating yet, out of respect for my ex. But then he'd remind me that Kenneth hadn't shown nearly that same amount of respect when he'd been screwing someone else before the divorce papers even hit my desk. I'd relent. He'd be right, of course. We wouldn't fall into bed just then, though. This wasn't the movies, and people didn't actually do that, but we'd be there, together, letting our feelings out of their cages completely. "But I am," I murmured. And then I lived out just a tiny little part of my fantasy, forgetting for a moment that I came here to ask him how to find a half-fae. I came forward until I was standing right in front of him. He could feel me there, could probably hear me breathing, and looked up, managing to nearly make eye contact with me. Ever so slowly I lifted my hand out and cupped his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin and the roughness of the beard that was coming in. His eyes fell closed of their own accord, and Hunter tilted his face and brought one of his own rough hands up to caress my own. For a brief second we stayed there, locked together like a real couple, breathing in and out in the same rhythm. We could almost forget. Almost. "Why are you here, Shannon?" Hunter finally asked, his voice not much more than a whisper. He pulled away, opened his eyes, and looked right up at me. Cloaking spell or not, I knew he was seeing me in that moment. I stepped away and sucked in a deep breath before making my confession. "There's another half-fae here in Portland. I need your help to find her." Chapter 3. "You... another... how?" The words spilled out of his mouth, at once sharp and confused as he tried to put the pieces together. Admittedly, the fact that he couldn't see me made things a bit strange, seeing as he spent most of the time looking around, trying to find me and still not being able to. "I had a vision," I explained. "I was going through the Lost and Found, and there was this necklace. Oh, wait, here." I produced the necklace from my pocket and held it out to him, but his eyes just searched the space where I stood. Hear what? He asked. This spell is good, I muttered.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?